What's up, everybody? I'm Jeremy. Welcome back to Catfish Motorsports. We're going to do a real quick review for you today. If you're a garage person and you spend any time doom scrolling through Instagram and TikTok, you've probably seen one of these. It's a portable diesel heater. I swear every other ad on Instagram for me has been one of these for the last 2 months, and they got me. They finally got me to buy one. The most common brand you'll see is Vibor. This is an Hcalory. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that's what I've been calling it. I actually watched a video on Project Farm where they reviewed 4 of them, and they were basically all the same internally. So I just went with the one that both had an AC adapter and was going to be delivered the quickest. So that was really my reasoning for going with this particular model over others. I'll put the link to that Project Farm video in case you want to see it. But like I said, the results they're basically all the same. The model number for this thing, I've seen printed 2 different ways. My box says HC2-H, but the internet also calls it an HBS2. So it's an Hcalory HBH2 or an HC2-H. I don't know what the difference is. I suspect it's probably for different locations, whether you're buying in like the UK or US. If I had to guess, I'd say that's what it is. Like one gives you a European plug and the other one gives you a 110 volt United States plug. I just wanted to give you guys kind of a realistic idea of what you can expect after playing with this for like a day and a half, 2 days now. Now, quick reference. I live in South Central Indiana. That is not nearly as gangster as it sounds. And for me right now, it is really cold. It's about 8 degrees outside. It's about as cold as it gets here, and it usually doesn't stay that way for more than a couple of days. But if you guys are from Michigan, Wisconsin, Canada, you might see significantly longer cold snaps than we do here. So just keep that in mind. So we're in my shop right now. My shop is kind of an odd size, but for all intents and purposes, it's 40 by 30. So it's about 1,200 square feet, which is pretty big for what these are actually designed for. These are built for like camping and stuff like that, and for heating RVs. I think truckers use them a lot too. So it's kind of a big space for that, but I had seen a lot of these, what really look like paid reviews. Again, keep in mind, I bought this with my own money. Nobody sent me a free sample, so you're getting an honest opinion here. I'd seen a lot of people say like they had them in fairly big spaces and they had brought everything up to like 70 degrees. I don't believe that at this point. Now, that's not to disparage this little unit, because I do think it's doing its job. But don't expect to put it in a big-ass shop in the middle of winter up north and be working in your garage in a shorts and t-shirt. It's probably not going to happen. I have a wood stove in my garage, and I've used it as long as I've lived here. It came with the house. If I had bought this personally, instead of it coming with the place, I probably would have installed a pellet stove. I am lazy with stuff like this. I do not like having to get up hours before I want to work in my garage and heat up my garage, and this is probably a little undersized compared to what should be in here. I don't like keeping firewood dry, and I had a friend burn their whole garage down with one of these and lose a bunch of antique tractors. So I use it, but they sketched me out to leave it running all night, and again, just with all the little auxiliaries, I just don't like it. So I was looking for an alternative solution, which is how ultimately the TikTok shop talked me into one of these. So down and dirty, just a couple of little things. I had played with this most of the day yesterday. It wasn't quite as cold, but it was still in the low teens, which again is very cold for this area. And I had worked the garage up to about 50 degrees in here. Now my garage is fairly well insulated, so for reference, normally when it's 20 degrees outside, it'll still be high 30s in here. It's rare for my garage to get down, even with no heating, to get down to where it's below water freezing temperature, 32 degrees Fahrenheit in here. Only happens a couple times a year. So I worked the garage up to about 50 with this thing at various settings throughout the day. Then I filled it up, maybe not quite all the way full, but past the line where you could see, and put it on low power. Now this has 10 power settings, 1 through 10. I set it at 3, so we'll call that 30% power. And I left it there from about 9:30 at night and about 9:30 this morning. And it used about a half of a fuel tank, which is roughly a half gallon of diesel. It was very cold last night. It was only about 1 degree. When I got up this morning to check it, the garage was high 30s. I had 40 on one thermometer and like 38 on another thermometer. And with no heating at all, I would have expected it to be below freezing here, like high 20s. So I do think it gave me about a 10-degree jump in temperature compared to what it would have been with no heating. I turned it off briefly because you're not supposed to put fuel in it when it's running. So I turned it off, put fuel in it, and then ramped it up to 80% of its power. And I've had it running that way for about 5 hours. And now we're up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit on that thermometer and 48 on that one. So about the same thing. There's about 2 difference between them. And realistically, that's what I want you guys to take from this. If you have a big area like this, I think you can expect it to give you about 8 to 12, 14 degrees maybe over what you would be without it being heated at all. And that might not sound like much, but it's actually quite a bit. So like for me, if we would have had more normal winter temps around here where, you know, high of 38, which is kind of standard for this time of year, which would mean my garage unheated is probably something more like 48, and I got another 12 degrees. Well, now all of a sudden it's 60 degrees in here without the fireplace on. That's pretty good. Like I can come out here and work pretty comfortably in 60 degrees, no problem. Honestly, that's kind of ideal. If you have a smaller space, you can probably expect it to heat it up more and faster. But for me, in a 1,200 square foot shop, when it's this cold outside, I'm probably gonna have to put the fireplace on too to get it to a temperature that's, you know, not really chilly to come out and work in. Now that said, 50 degrees, I could definitely make that happen. That's not that big of a deal. I've worked in colder before. So that'll give you an idea on what to expect for the temperature variance with this thing. Let's talk a couple of little things about setup and all that, and maybe why I would have chosen a different model as opposed to this one. There's a window right there that really washes out the light, so I'm trying to get you guys in a place where you can see. This comes with a pretty big manual. It is useless. Has a whole lot of pages, but really all it does is give you subpar instructions in about 13 different languages. Now it's not hard to set up. You really don't need much for directions. The only thing you really have to do is attach the exhaust pipe and the intake air filter. That's the first point that I want to say. I might have gone with a different unit had I thought harder about this, because some of the other units have those ports in the side instead of coming from under the unit, which is not only easier to install, but that exhaust tube does get pretty hot. It gets up to about 230, 250 degrees, depending on, you know, what setting you're running at. So just having it further away from things and not having it running close to whatever you've got it sitting on just seems like a safer operation to me. Speaking of the exhaust, I'll show you a picture of it. I just kind of have this running with some scrap material. I took a piece of wood, used a 2.5-inch hole saw, cut a circular piece out. Then I put a piece of scrap metal in a square over it and drilled a smaller hole in the scrap metal in the middle of that piece of wood. And that's what I'm running the exhaust tube out of. And if I use my little handy dandy thermometer here, while the exhaust tube itself is about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, the metal around it is only about 80 to 100, depending on where you have it. And that's kind of the highest numbers I've seen. If it's in a colder cycle, like if I don't have it at 80% power, that'll be like 20 degrees different. And then you look at the wood around it, it's like 65 degrees. And this has been like this all night. This has been running pretty much straight for about 15 hours. So I really don't think this is a fire hazard. But the most common thing I've seen and the cleanest way to do this is people use boat hull like exhaust ports that you can buy on Amazon for about $15. I'll put a link to one. I'm probably going to buy one of those myself. I just didn't want to wait for that to get shipped before I fired this thing up. Noise, I'm kind of curious to hear what it sounds like when I edit this video. It's not overly loud, and I'm standing right next to it, so maybe it sounds loud to you guys. It's actually louder from the outside. If you ever worked on an airfield, to me it sounds like an APU when you just hear the exhaust routing out the window if I'm standing outside. But in here, it's really not loud at all. The thing itself is not hot. If I put my temperature gun on it, it's like 100 degrees, but you know, you could touch it. It's not that big of a deal. In your hot air outlet, your blower, for lack of a better word, there is a steel piece right there. That's the heating unit, steel or aluminum one. And it is 275 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is very hot. So if you have kids, animals, whatever, or even yourself, it is not a bad idea to install this tube, just because it'll stop you from going up and touching that piece of extraordinarily hot metal. And last note on setup, because again, really, while the directions suck, really the only thing you have to do is put those two tubes on, because there's a hose clamp that you have to put on the inlet. It is easier to just pull the body off. It's just held in by like 10 or 12 screws, just Phillips head screws, no problem. Pop that off, and this whole thing will lift off, and then you can get your hand in there with a screwdriver. It might sound like it'd be easier just to tighten one clamp in a tight space. It's not. Take the thing off. You'll trust me, it'll save you time. It's a few days later. It is a much more normal winter central Indiana day. Low last night was in the high 20s. High today is something like 40, 45, kind of standard December Indiana weather. And we repeated the exact same experiment. When I got up this morning after it running all night on low, it was about 50 degrees in here. And now we've got another like 9 degrees. My little electronic thermometer here, it is 59 degrees Fahrenheit in here currently. And really, this is about the same kind of temperature changes that I get from my fireplace over there. It's just a lot more of a pain in the butt to get that thing up and going. compared to just kind of putting fuel in this one and turning it on. Pay no attention to the diesel jug next to that. That doesn't always sit there. It's just there because the fireplace is running. And I feel safer letting this run overnight. While it's not perfectly safe, I'm sure, it at least has overheat sensors and things like that. Whereas that's just a fire. If something happens there, there is no chance that it's going to put itself out when I'm not here. There's at least a chance this thing's going to shut itself off and stop the whole garage from burning down. Simple closing statement. If you have reasonable expectations for the $100, $150 that these things cost, they're a pretty good deal. Just have reasonable expectations, because if you have a big shop like mine, don't believe the hype that some people are selling you that this thing is all of a sudden going to make your shop 70 degrees when it's 10 below outside. That's not going to happen. If you've got a much smaller shop or you're using it for an RV or something, it probably will make a much bigger temperature difference. If you got a 3-car, even probably a 2-car garage that's, 600 square feet, it's going to work. It's going to have an effect, but you're probably not going to be wearing a tank top wearing on your cars. Just keep that in mind. Please like and subscribe. Hopefully you learned something from this. We'll see you next time.